It was one of those Tuesdays where the sky looks like it can't decide if it wants to cry or just stay gray all day. I remember the exact date, April 9th, 2024. I just finished my first cup of coffee and was making a grocery list when my phone buzzed. My sister's name, Michelle, flashed on the screen. Now, Michelle and we talk, but not often. We've always had that weird sort of sibling dynamic where we're civil, but there's this unspoken undercurrent of tension. She's always been the doer, the one who plans, books, handles, arranges, and somehow makes sure I know about it. So when I saw her calling at 8:16 in the morning, I knew something was off. Her voice was tight, too cheerful in a way that didn't match the words she said. "Hey, just wanted to let you know, mom's in the hospital. She called 911 this morning. Pneumonia." I blinked, the grocery list still in my hand. "What? Wait, what happened?" Michelle breezed through the details like she was reading me the weather. "She called herself, which is good. They took her to Mercy General. She's stable. Just thought you should know." The words "just thought you should know" hit like a slap. Casual, detached, as if mom had twisted an ankle or burned her hand, not struggling to breathe and dialing 911 alone. And then of course Michelle added, "I'd go, but I have this cruise with Natalie tomorrow. It's been booked for months, non-refundable. I'll be gone for 5 days. Could you visit mom while I'm away?" New emotion, new pause. I didn't even answer right away. I was already halfway into my bedroom, pulling on jeans, grabbing my keys. Something didn't sit right. Not with Michelle's tone, not with how late the call came, not with any of it. I got to the hospital within the hour. It's about a 30-minute drive from my apartment in Sacramento, but I must have gotten there in 20. The emergency room was sterile and too quiet for mid-morning. I gave my name and mom's, and they told me she'd been moved to a room upstairs, room 410. I'll never forget it. I remember the smell antiseptic and stale air conditioning. The lights too white, the hallway walls too blank. When I walked into her room, she was asleep, frail against the stiff white sheets, oxygen tubes looping around her face like vines. My chest tightened. She looked older than I remembered, smaller, and that's when guilt began to creep in. I hadn't seen her in almost 3 months. Not because I didn't care, I did, but life kept getting in the way. Work deadlines, trying to afford rent, the day-to-day exhaustion. And maybe, if I'm honest, a small part of me kept my distance because I always assumed Michelle had it handled. She lived closer. She was the organized one. She made it clear she liked being in charge. When mom opened her eyes, they watered. She smiled weakly and whispered my name, and I felt something break inside me. I sat by her bed for hours that day, held her hand, listened to her wheeze. We didn't talk much, but I could tell she was happy I was there. She drifted in and out, and I stayed. I even read aloud from a paperback novel I found in the gift shop. Later that afternoon, Michelle texted me, "Thanks again for being there. Ship boards at 11 a.m. tomorrow. I'll be out of reach, but call Natalie if anything urgent comes up." That was it. No phone call, no concern, just a line of text, like she was handing me a grocery list instead of our mother's care. That night, I went home and couldn't sleep. My mind was replaying the call, the hospital visit, mom's face, Michelle's tone. Something wasn't adding up. So the next morning, before heading back to the hospital, I asked one of the nurses a casual question while they were checking vitals. "When did she come in?" The nurse glanced at the chart. Admitted Friday evening, around 7 p.m. I must have stared at her for a full 10 seconds, heart pounding in my ears. "Sorry, did you say Friday?" She nodded like it was nothing. "Yeah, she's been here since then." My stomach dropped. My vision tunneled for a second. Friday? That meant Michelle had known since Friday. She didn't call me until Tuesday, 4 whole days later, and only when she needed someone to cover for her. I thanked the nurse and stepped into the hallway. I remember leaning against the cold wall, sliding down until I was sitting on the linoleum floor like a child who had just learned Santa wasn't real. Except this was worse. This wasn't just deception. It was betrayal. That's when the real story began, not just mom's illness, but mine. The unraveling, the quiet fury, the heartbreak of realizing you're not your family's first thought, not even when it matters most. And I had 5 days to sit with that, while Michelle sipped cocktails on a ship and posted sunsets on Instagram with captions like "much needed escape weather," as if her conscience hadn't just boarded with her. But the story wasn't over, not by a long shot. The air outside mom's place that evening was unusually calm. A late April breeze moved the wind chimes on her porch just enough to make them sing, and for a moment it felt like the world was finally exhaling after holding its breath for weeks. Michelle didn't stay long. She stood in the living room, barely 5 minutes, making stiff conversation about the drive, the weather, some neighbor who trimmed their hedges too short. I watched her from the kitchen as she rearranged the flowers on the table and checked her phone between words. It was all so performative, as if she needed to reestablish her presence, her version of care, her role. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I didn't remind her of the days she'd been absent or the nights I cried on the linoleum floor of room 410. I'd already said everything I needed to without ever raising my voice. Eventually, she muttered something about groceries and said she'd stop by later in the week. She kissed mom on the forehead and walked out, her heels tapping the tile like punctuation. I stayed a little longer, made tea, helped mom into her pajamas, fluffed the pillows. She was slower, still easily tired, but her cheeks had more color and her voice no longer rasped. Before I left, she reached for my hand and held it. Her fingers were cool and delicate, like thin paper left out in the sun too long. "You're a good daughter," she said. It came out so quietly, I almost didn't catch it, but I did. And I think my heart cracked open in the best possible way. Because those 4 words carried more weight than any apology Michelle could have offered, they washed over years of feeling second, of being overlooked, of internalizing every role I was never meant to play. I didn't cry, not then. I just held her hand and nodded. "Good night, Mom," I whispered, and kissed her forehead. When I got home, my apartment felt different. Not emptier, but lighter. Like some invisible pressure had finally lifted. I sat on the couch in the dark for a long time. No TV, no music, just quiet. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't waiting for Michelle to explain herself or change. I had let Ghana out of weakness, but out of strength. Some things don't need confrontation to be resolved. Sometimes silence says everything. I began journaling again in the weeks that followed. Just small entries, scraps of thoughts, observations, memories. Writing had always been my way of making sense of things, and now I had so much to unpack. I wrote about Michelle, about Mom, about the childhood moments that made more sense in hindsight. And as I wrote, I realized I wasn't just recording, I was rewriting my story, my role in the family, my voice. Mom's recovery continued steadily. I visited every few days. We'd sit in her tiny kitchen drinking tea, talking about books, old movies, the neighbor's loud dog. She smiled more. She laughed. Her laugh had always been quiet, but it was back. Michelle remained Michelle. She showed up when it was convenient, posted occasional photos with captions about gratitude and family. She never mentioned the hospital week again, never addressed the timing, never asked what really happened while she was gone. But I didn't need her to, because I knew I had lived it. I had earned the silence. One evening, months later, Mom and I went through more old photo albums. She pointed at a picture of us at the lake, laughing, soaked, covered in dirt from falling off the paddle boat. "You were always the soft one," she said, not as an insult, but as something tender, always feeling everything. And for once, I didn't flinch at that. I smiled. Yeah, I think I still am. Being soft in a world that rewards hardness isn't a flaw, it's a risk, but it's also a strength, because it's the soft ones who stay, who show up when no one else will, who remember birthdays, who sit through the night, who ask how you're really doing. That was the real turning point. I think not Michelle leaving, not the hospital hallway, not even the confrontation that never came. The real change happened in the quiet moments after, the rebuilding, the reclaiming. It's been nearly a year now. Mom's doing well. She's back to gardening, small walks, and giving unsolicited advice about how I should date more. I visit weekly. I bring her flowers or fresh bread or just myself. Michelle and I coexist. We're not enemies. We're not friends. We're sisters in the most technical sensei title that exists more in DNA than in practice. But I'm okay with that, truly, because now I know where I stand. Not in the background, not in her shadow, but here in my own light, finally. And if I've learned anything, it's this. Sometimes we don't get the family we want. We get the one we're given. And sometimes they disappoint us. They break us. They disappear when it matters most. But if you're lucky, if you're very lucky, you find your own way back. Not just to your loved ones, but to yourself. Sunday night was quiet in the hospital. The hum of machines, the occasional soft shuffle of nurses' shoes on tile. I sat in the chair beside Mom's bed, half asleep, the kind of exhausted that doesn't just live in your body, it takes up residence in your bones. I texted work earlier that morning to tell them I needed another couple days off. No explanation, just family emergency. My manager didn't push. I think they could sense the weight in my voice. I hadn't even thought about my own apartment in days. I'd been living off vending machine snacks and whatever bland meals the cafeteria offered, but the strangest thing, I didn't want to leave, not even for a second, not anymore. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something that mattered. Mom was still fragile. The pneumonia had taken more out of her than she let on. She kept trying to act like it was just a minor hiccup, but I'd seen the fear in her eyes the night before when her coughing fit lasted so long she gripped the bed rails like they were the only thing keeping her in this world. I didn't sleep much that night. I sat beside her, watching her chest rise and fall. I remember thinking how strange it is that we forget our parents are human, fragile, mortal, just as vulnerable as we are. And yet, there she was, smaller than I'd ever seen her, and all I wanted in that moment was to protect her in every way I hadn't before. On Monday morning, I went down to the social worker's office. Her name was Paula, middle-aged, warm but firm, the kind of woman who'd seen 100 families like mine and wasn't shocked by much anymore. I asked about post-discharge care. Could someone come to the apartment and help her with meals, medications, light chores? I wasn't sure how long I could take off work. I needed options. I needed to plan. She walked me through resources, community nurses, state subsidies, Medicare forms, and then she paused and said, "Your sister mentioned something about you being unavailable before. It's good to see you involved now." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat clenched. Michelle had spoken for me. Again, written my role in this story before I'd even opened my mouth. I realized then how much of my life had been shaped by the versions of me that other people constructed. Not just Michelle, but relatives, teachers, even exes. I was always the one who feels too much, the flaky one, the one who's not like Michelle. And here I was doing everything. Showing up, managing logistics, holding my mother's hand while she struggled to breathe, and still, I was an afterthought. It messed with my head more than I expected. By Tuesday, the cruise was over. Michelle texted that she was back on land and would stop by the hospital the next day. No apology, no explanation, just a cold declaration like nothing had happened. I didn't reply. That day, I left the hospital for the first time to go home and shower. The moment I stepped into my apartment, I broke down again. Seeing my space untouched made me feel unmoored, like time had kept moving out here while I'd been frozen inside those hospital walls. I stood in the shower, letting the hot water scald my skin until I couldn't tell if I was crying or just drenched. That night, I opened an old photo album. Mom had given it to me years ago. I never looked through it much, but something compelled me to that evening. Maybe I needed a reminder, a reason to keep going. There were pictures of birthdays and beach trips. One of me at 7, curled up on Mom's lap with a stuffed bear. Another of Michelle holding a cake while I stood beside her, eyes puffy, probably crying because I didn't get to blow out the candles. There was one photo that gutted me completely. Christmas 2003. Mom had her arms around both of us. Michelle was beaming in a red dress, and I was tucked into Mom's side, half smiling but peaceful. It looked like we were happy. It looked like love. And yet, I couldn't remember that day. I sat on the floor for a long time, that photo in my hands, wondering how we got here, how a family so tightly knit in photographs could come apart so quietly, thread by thread, until all that was left were duties and obligations. The next morning, I returned to the hospital just in time to see Michelle breezing into room 410 like a storm that doesn't ask for permission. She was wearing crisp linen pants and wedge heels, her hair done, face lightly made up. She kissed Mom on the cheek, then turned to me. "You look tired," she said, as if it were a mild observation and not a passive jab. I didn't respond. She sat, crossed her legs, pulled out her phone like she was waiting for the next act in a play. Mom smiled at her like nothing was wrong, because that's what Mom did. She made peace where there was none. Michelle talked about the cruise for a bit, how the food was great, how Natalie tried ziplining. She never asked about the social worker or the treatment plan or the follow-up appointments I'd scheduled. It was like those 5 days didn't exist for her. Then, as casually as if she were talking about picking up milk, she said, "I'll take over now. You probably need rest." That was it. I stood, nodded, and left. Not because I agreed, but because I realized that no matter how much I gave, how much I showed up, I would always be invisible in Michelle's narrative. But I wasn't going to let her write mine anymore. I sat there in that hospital hallway for maybe 10, 15 minutes, trying to make sense of it. My mind kept looping back to Friday. Where was I on Friday night? I had gone to dinner with a couple of friends from work. I even remember complaining about being tired, overworked. If Michelle had just called just once, I would have dropped everything and come. I would have been here. I would have held Mom's hand that first night when she was scared, alone, and gasping for air. But instead, my sister waited until Tuesday morning. Waited until she needed something. And what burned more than the deception was the intent behind it. This wasn't a mistake or miscommunication. This was a choice, a decision to keep me in the dark because it was easier, more convenient for her. Michelle had always been the one with a polished image, the careful calendar, the perfect daughter reputation she clung to like armor. I had always been, well, the other one, the more emotional, messier sibling, the one who took longer to finish school, the one who didn't have a picture-perfect family or Instagram-worthy vacations. But I loved Mom. I loved her in ways that didn't always show up in photos. I loved her in the way I noticed her favorite tea was out of stock and picked it up from 3 stores over, in the way I remembered she hated thunderstorms and would call her when the skies cracked open. I might not have been present all the time, but my heart had always been in it. That morning, I returned to Mom's room and sat beside her again, but this time I carried a bitterness I hadn't known before. She smiled faintly when she saw me, her breathing still shallow but steadier than yesterday. I kissed her forehead and adjusted her blanket like I was trying to cover not just her legs, but all the years of distance between us. I didn't bring it up with her. Not then. She didn't need stress. She didn't need family drama while she was recovering from pneumonia at 73 years old. But it ate away at me every hour I spent at that bedside. Every shift change, every sponge bath, every Jello cup she pushed away. By Thursday, I knew something had to be said. Not to Mom, to Michelle. I waited until late evening. I figured she'd be on the ship by then, maybe in her cabin. I sent her a message, knowing full well she wouldn't reply, but needing to get it off my chest anyway. "Why didn't you call me Friday? She was in the hospital for 4 days before you said anything. You only told me when it became inconvenient for you. I'm not angry. I'm just done pretending like this is normal." She didn't reply. Instead, the next morning, she posted a photo of herself and Natalie, her teenage daughter, on a deck chair with those stupid frozen drinks and matching sunglasses. The caption said, "Life is short, love hard, forgive fast, mother-daughter, blessed." I stared at that caption for a long time. Forgive fast. Was that what she thought this was? Something I'd sweep under the rug like forgotten birthday cards and missed holidays? Like all the other times I'd made myself smaller to avoid rocking the boat? I'd forgiven her so many times, like the time she told me I was too unstable to handle Mom's medications, or when she forgot to include me in planning Mom's 7th birthday, then made it seem like it was my fault for not checking in. But this was different. This was Mom's life. This was 4 days of silence while our mother struggled to breathe, and I was left out not because I was unreachable, but because Michelle didn't think I was relevant until she had to leave town. That Friday, I went through Mom's chart again with a nurse who had become familiar by now, Nadine. She had kind eyes and always asked how I was doing, not just how Mom was doing. I asked about Mom's condition, and Nadine explained that Mom had actually worsened over the weekend, spiking a fever and needing additional oxygen support Saturday night. I clenched my jaw. That was the night Michelle uploaded a story from a wine bar downtown, smiling, perfectly dressed, laughing with friends. She'd known how serious it was and still chose not to say anything. That night, while Mom slept, I cried in the hospital bathroom. Silent, snotty, gut-wrenching tears. The kind that come from the pit of your stomach. I wasn't just crying for her, I was crying for everything that came before. For all the years I felt like a guest in my own family. For the memories I missed because I was labeled too emotional or not dependable. For the long history of being needed only when it was convenient. By Saturday, I stopped pretending. I told the nurses to put my number as the primary contact. I started asking questions I knew Michelle would have wanted to ask herself. I reviewed mom's medications, made sure she was scheduled for physical therapy, even arranged for a social worker to visit in case we needed a home care plan once she was discharged. The staff took me seriously. They responded to me. It felt empowering in a strange, bittersweet way, like I had finally stepped into a role that was always there, waiting for me but previously claimed by someone who never truly respected it. On Sunday afternoon, mom asked me if Michelle was coming to visit. I hesitated, and I said softly, "She's on a cruise with Natalie. She'll be back in a few days." Mom just nodded. No judgment, no complaint. That's who she was. Always understanding, always forgiving, and I think that made it hurt even more. Because I couldn't understand. I couldn't forgive. Not this time. I drove home in silence that morning after Michelle took her seat in the hospital room like nothing had happened. There wasn't music, no podcast, just a dull hum of the engine and my own thoughts screaming louder than any soundtrack could. The whole way home, I kept replaying that moment when she looked at me and said, "You probably need rest." I could still hear it, clear as day, how those words weren't offered in kindness, but in dismissal. It wasn't about me being tired. It was about her reclaiming her stage. Like those 5 days I spent holding our mother's hand were just a placeholder for the real daughter to step back in. But something in me had changed. There was a line inside that had finally been crossed, and now there was no going back to how things were. That night, I started gathering things. Paperwork from the hospital, discharge plans, notes I'd written, a schedule I drafted for medications and follow-ups, all of it. I photographed every page. I emailed everything to myself. I organized it into folders. I wanted a record me record because I knew how this would go. Michelle would start rewriting the narrative within days. It would begin with subtle jabs in family group chats. When mom was sick, it was such a blur. Or I did what I could from afar, and eventually her story would become the one people remembered. I wasn't going to let that happen. That week, I stayed away from the hospital. I needed space, but I still called daily to check on mom. The nurses had my number saved now. They'd speak to me freely. Nadine even told me, "Your mom lights up when you call." I asked how she was eating, how the breathing looked, if she was moving around. They answered with warmth and detail. Michelle, meanwhile, had already started reappearing in social circles. I saw her post a boomerang of wine glasses clinking at a rooftop bar. The caption said, "Back to real life, sister's night out." I stared at that post for a long time. It wasn't that I resented her joy. It was that her joy had a body count and I wasn't going to be the one buried under it anymore. That weekend, I called mom and asked if I could take her home when she was discharged. "Just for a few days," I said. "I'll set up a little area in my place. I've already cleared the guest room. It's quiet here." She hesitated, of course, said she didn't want to burden me. I told her she wasn't. I told her I wanted to, because I did. Not just to take care of her, but to take back the space I had let Michelle control for so long. Mom agreed. On April 2020, I picked her up from the hospital and brought her home with me. She shuffled slowly up the walkway to my apartment, her steps shaky but determined. I held her arm, careful, gentle, like I was guiding something sacred, because I was. Inside, I had set everything up. Extra pillows, an air purifier, her favorite chamomile tea. I even found an old movie she loved from the 70s and had it ready on the TV. When she laid down in the guest bed, she smiled at me with a tired but sincere expression. "You didn't have to do all this," she said softly, "but I did have to, because for the first time, I wanted Tana not just for her, but for me. For the version of me that had always been painted as distant, untrustworthy, unreliable. I wasn't doing it for Michelle's approval anymore. I wasn't doing it to prove a point. I was doing it because this was my mother, and I loved Taryn. I didn't need anyone else's permission to show that anymore." That week, something changed between us, mom, and me. We talked, really talked. Not about Michelle, not about what happened, but about life, about the past, about little things. She told me about her first job at the diner back in '73, and how she used to sneak butterscotch candies from the counter when the manager wasn't looking. She told me about dad, how he used to write her notes on napkins before they got married. She told me she missed him. I did too. We shared stories, watched old sitcoms, and took slow walks to the mailbox. She was healing, not just from the pneumonia, but from years of silence between us. And I was healing too. Midweek, Michelle texted me, "Where is mom? I was gonna stop by today." I didn't respond right away. I waited a day. Then I texted back, short and direct. "She's staying with me. She's doing well." Michelle replied almost instantly, "Why didn't you tell me?" I typed, deleted, retyped, and I finally wrote, "The same reason you didn't tell me on Friday." She didn't respond to that. And honestly, I didn't expect her to. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I wasn't even trying to get back at her. I was simply showing her how it felt to be left out, to be told last, to realize you only mattered when it was convenient. Mom stayed with me for nearly 2 weeks. I cooked for her, read to her, sat with her while she dozed on the couch. It was hard, yes, but it was meaningful. Every moment felt like a thread mending a tear I didn't even know I'd been carrying for years. When she was strong enough, she said she wanted to go back to her place. I helped her pack. I drove her back. I set everything up the way it had been before. Michelle showed up later that evening. I let her in. We didn't say much, just exchanged a glance, but I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. Not guilt, not remorse exactly, but something quieter. A shift. A recognition maybe that the script had changed, because I wasn't in the background anymore.